Hello, there we go. Good morning, everyone. How are you doing this morning? Good. Excellent. Now, of course, as some of you would know, we also have a 6 o'clock service tonight. We're going to have a time of worship together, which will really be a response for this morning's service. At the moment, that service is fully subscribed. So if you haven't registered, maybe you can sit outside in the car and listen. I think that's permissible, if you would like. No, we don't want to broadcast. No. But yeah, that's going to be good. So those who have registered, please make sure you come. If you have registered and you've changed your mind, then please let us know, because someone else may want to be able to come in your place. But that's good. I'm going to get straight into it today. This is going to be scary for you all. I'm admitting right from the outset that I have a lot to say. So buckle yourselves in. Maybe if you've got yeah, I gotta say, if you've got a caffeine pill, you might want to just take that right now or something. Anyway, as always, let's start with a story. It's about a man who had been lost. He was walking around the desert one day, and he'd been in the desert lost for about 2 weeks. One hot day, he sees the home of a missionary. Tired and weak, he crawls up to the house and collapses at the doorstep. The missionary finds him and nurses him back to health. Feeling better, the man asks the missionaries for directions to the nearest town. On his way out the back door, he sees this horse. He goes back into the house and he asks the missionary, do you think I could borrow the horse and give it back to you when I come back from town? The missionary says, sure, but there's a special thing about this horse. It's a saved horse. To make it go, you have to say, thank God. And to make it stop, you have to say, amen. Not really paying much attention to what had just been told, the guy takes the horse and heads into town. Sure, okay, he says. So he gets on the horse and he remembers this. Thank God, he says, and the horse just starts a little bit. Thank God, he says again, the horse speeds up. Thank God, he says again, the horse is now into a full-on gallop. Yes, thank you. And he starts to come towards the edge of a cliff. He's like, oh, what do I do now? Of course, he didn't pay attention. So he doesn't know. He's trying everything he can. Stop! Whoa! Stop! Slow down! Don't hit the cliff, he says. Finally, he resorts to the only thing he knows how to do. Pray. He says, Dear Jesus, please make this horse stop. Amen. Immediately, the horse grinds to a halt about 4 foot from the edge of the cliff. The guy leans back in his saddle. Phew! Thank God. Today, we're continuing our series on Revelation. This is the third of a 4-week series on this very misunderstood book. And really, today's message, I almost became 2 sermons, but I really think that all of this needs to be shared together to get a good understanding of what's going on in this part of Revelation. As we investigate, I hope that you are seeing and understanding that this book has not been written to fuel some sort of speculation or that's subject to recent history or all of history. Instead, it speaks of the spiritual battle with physical manifestations that require a spiritual response. Spiritual battle, physical manifestations, spiritual response. And my purpose in this is to uncover 4 themes that I see woven through the pages of Revelation. Other people may see different, but I'm sharing with you from my study and from my reading through it. And they're about how we live our daily lives. You know, Revelation shouldn't just be, this is something that will impact the world at some stage in the future. It's part of the Bible. It's part of the canon of Scripture, and it directs us how we live day by day. We have to read Revelation through that lens. The first, which I spoke about a couple of weeks ago, is that we should live in victory. We should live in victory because we follow one who has already won for us. And this should impact our faith, and this should impact our perspective of the future. And I'm sure for all, if not many of us, the last 18 months has been a challenge in that. We've struggled. We've lost the sense, I think, that we have the victory of Jesus Christ that governs our future. And maybe situations like this are a reminder to us that we need a shaping of perspective, that we need a building of our faith so that we can live in that victory that we are intended to. And I don't say that to condemn us, but it is a reminder to all of us that more trust and more faith is required. And last week, we looked at the second theme, which I see, which is a very encouraging theme. It's the theme of apathy. Not something to attain, something to avoid, just in case some of you are confused, which is a constant temptation of the church to roll back into apathy. We all know the wonder and the joy of following Jesus, but we all consistently drift back into apathy and drift back into a place where we're not really passionate about Christ. And we learn that spending time with Jesus and in Christ-focused fellowship is critical to our faith. Now, thinking about this week, we love each other's company. We are a church that loves fellowship, and that's great. Can I encourage us when we come together, not just to talk about the weather or the footy or what's going on in our lives, but let's also encourage each other with the Spirit of God. Let's bring Christ into some of those conversations as well. As we prepare to investigate the third theme today, there's something about Revelation that I personally find remarkable. I hope that you share this enthusiasm with me. 2 Timothy chapter 3 verse 16 says that all scripture is God-breathed. Everything in the Bible has been inspired by God and is divine in nature and can be used by us to live our lives. However, it was written by very human means. It was written by people. It was written based on their perspectives and their observations by individuals as motivated by the Holy Spirit. And so there are a number of authors, perhaps 40 authors of the Bible, people such as Moses and David and Solomon and the sons of Korah and all of the prophets and Matthew and Mark and Luke and John and Paul and Peter and James and Jude. And there seems to be quite a number of books as well written by some guy named Unknown. But despite so many authors, the Bible as a whole is an intricate weaving of the story of Christ. It is obviously inspired by the Holy Spirit, the way it all speaks together and follows a theme together over 2,000 years of writing. It's incredible. And when we think about the book of Revelation, it to me is such an example. Because the Bible as we know it wasn't compiled until about the mid-3rd century AD, about 250 AD. In fact, the first person to ever consider compiling some of the books and letters, especially together, was the church thought that was such a crazy idea that they excommunicated him. About 150 years later, they thought, oh no, maybe it was a good idea after all. And so Revelation is perfectly written as the final book of the Bible. It wraps everything together. It completes the story that began in the Garden of Eden that was destroyed by sin and evil, but redeemed by the death and the resurrection of Christ, and speaks of his eternal victory and eventual defeat of evil. Revelation, it captures all of that together and sort of ties it up for us. But it was written as the last book of the Bible 150 years before the Bible was even thought of. God knew what he was doing, right? God inspired John to write these pages as the conclusion of a book that hadn't even yet been compiled. And so we can see, I find it remarkable to read Revelation and see that John wouldn't have even known the extent of what he was writing when he wrote this, that the Holy Spirit inspired it, and so we get to be blessed by it today. This amazement of the wonder of God leads us into the third theme that I want to discuss in our journey of Revelation. First theme was victory. Second theme, let's call it passion, because we're not trying to do apathy. So let's call it passion. Third theme is worship. And we pick up John's picture this morning in the throne room of heaven, starting in Revelation chapter 4. And it says this, reading from verse 1. After this I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven. And the voice I had first heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." At once I was in the Spirit, and there before me was a throne in heaven, with someone sitting on it. And the one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and ruby. A rainbow that shone like an emerald encircled the throne. Try and picture this as I'm reading it to you. Surrounded the throne were 24 other thrones, and seated on them were 24 elders. They were dressed in white and had crowns of gold on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning, rumblings and peals of thunder. In front of the throne 7 lamps were blazing. They are the 7 spirits of God. Also in front of the throne there was what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal. In the center around the throne there were 4 living creatures, and they were covered with eyes in front and in back. The first living creature was like a lion. The second was like an ox. The third had a face like a man. The fourth was like a flying eagle. Each of the 4 living creatures had 6 wings and was covered with eyes all around. They're starting to look a bit gruesome now. Even under its wings. Day and night they never stopped saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." Whenever the living creatures give glory, honor, and thanks to him who sits on the throne and who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They lay their crowns before the throne and say, "You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being." I remember when I read this, I was entranced by this picture. God there, sitting on the throne. And it's a different picture to the one that we carry often in our church today of God being a loving dad. He is a loving dad. The wonder is that he is a loving dad, and he is also an awesome being. He sits on the throne, and I don't know if you pictured that as I read it. Out of that throne is coming lightning and thunder. And, part of me thinks about, I'd love to just sit at the footstool of God. But part of me thinks, if I'm going to be accosted by lightning and thunder while I'm there, then maybe I don't want to. It gives us a contrast view of who God is. Fully loving, but fully powerful. And around him, around this throne, are 24 other thrones. And there's 24 elders, one each sitting on one of these thrones. And I loved this picture. In the center, there's 4 living creatures. And the 4 living creatures, day and night, it says, day and night, they never stop saying, "Holy, holy, holy." They never stop worshipping. They just worshipping continually at the throne room of God. And whenever they give worship, I loved this. Whenever they give worship, the 24 elders fall before him and lay down their crowns. Picture this. 4 living creatures, they never stop worship. Every time they give worship, the elders get off their thrones, bow, lay down their crowns. They must have pretty good glutes, because those elders would be all the time, because the creatures never stop worship. Every time they worship, they get off their thrones and bow and they lay their crowns. It's sort of like, you can imagine this. This is what they'd be doing, because there's just continual worship and continual bowing. And you might look at this picture and say, this is way too much. Why does one being require all of this worship? Is he so insecure that he needs to be reminded all of the time that he's holy? Let's everyone find our silent switch this morning. We might think that, but you know what? That's what God is worth. In fact, that's not enough of what God is worth. There is no amount of worship that could be given to God that would be too much, because whatever we give is not worthy enough of who he is. Let's continue this picture in Revelation chapter 7, and we're reading from verse 9. It says, "There after this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands. And they cried out in a loud voice, 'Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne.'" If you're as old as I am, you're thinking of a song right now. "And unto the Lamb." And all the angels were standing around, or if you've been in church as long as I have, maybe I should say. If all the angels standing around the throne and around the elders and the four living creatures, they fell down on their faces before the throne. And they worshipped God, saying, "Amen. Praise and glory and wisdom and thanks and honor and power and strength be to our God forever and ever. Amen." Are you getting a picture of what's going on here? Everything in heaven is focused towards worship of the God who sits on the throne. Now, remember a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about Christ. And there was a contrast between, as John had this vision, what he heard and what he saw. Remember, what he heard was that Lion of the tribe of Judah was able to open the scrolls. And the Jewish perspective was that that would be a great warrior type man. You know, a lion, think of a lion. Instead, what he saw was a lamb that looked like it had been killed. It was a bit of a come down from what he was expecting to see. The same thing happens here. There's a contrast between what John hears is happening in heaven and what he sees in his vision that's taking place in heaven. See, Revelation chapter 7, verse 3 speaks of the people of God being sealed. We'll come back to that idea a little bit later. And in verse 4, it says that what John heard was that the number of those who were sealed was 144,000. 140. Now, there's much conjecture as to what this means. And I have but one answer today. You may hear other thoughts. They may be right. I may be wrong. But I'm going to share with you my perspectives on what this might mean. And I think some maths helps. Firstly, understanding that Revelation is an apocalyptic writing means it's not necessarily meant to be taken perfectly literally. So there's lots of symbolism and lots of numerology that we do need to understand. So I think some maths helps. Now, I was pretty good at maths at school. I appreciate not everyone else might have been in that situation. But I'm just going to give one perspective on this. I actually could give you multiple, but we'll simplify and give one. 144,000 equals 12 times 12 times 1,000. Are we all agreeing on that? We all know 12 times 12 is 144. Times 1,000 makes it 144,000. Good. Okay. That's the bit I'm really sure about. 12 reminds me of a joke, but I don't have time. 12 undoubtedly refers to the tribes of Israel. So the children of Israel, 12 disciples also reflected that 12 tribes of Israel. 12 is an important number in the Bible, and it always refers back to the fullness and the completion of Israel. It symbolizes God's people in the minds of a Jewish person. 12 tribes means all of us are together. In this sense, 12 marks completion and it marks perfection. In fact, 12 squared, 144, only appears in Revelation. And so my thought and research thought is that the 12 times 12 is not just all of the tribes of Israel, but the completion and the perfection of all of the tribes of Israel. So we're all of God's people. And then 1,000. I believe in the Bible, 1,000 is just a big number. It's just meant to say this is a lot. It's like when we say millions, and really that means 20. But really just trying to say there was a lot. It's like when we're young, it's like, I'm going to be a millionaire one day. Well, now if you own a house in Melbourne, you're a millionaire. You didn't even have to try, but that's another thing entirely. But 1,000, I think, is just meant to mean innumerable. For example, in Psalm 84, verse 10, when it says that one day is in God's courts is better than 1,000 elsewhere, it's not saying that there's a fixed time limit, that, if you spend 1,001 days elsewhere, that's now starting to be better than one day in God's courts. So one day in God's courts is better than any amount of time that you can spend anywhere else. It's infinite. Or let's look at some other examples. Deuteronomy 1:11, when it says that God increased Israel 1,000 times, I think just means he increased them many times, many more than they could count. In Deuteronomy 7 verse 9, where it says he keeps his covenant to 1,000 generations, it doesn't mean that he gets to 1,001 and says, look, you just missed out. I just ran out of blessing, and I'm really sorry, but you're just going to have to go to the back of the queue, and maybe no. It's innumerable. Innumerable. In Psalm 50 verse 10, when it says he owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, it just means that his riches, his wealth, his ownership it cannot be counted. This might help you understand this story. In 1 Samuel 18 verse 7, the people are chanting in the streets and they say, Saul has slain his thousands. Saul's probably thinking pretty good about that. See, they think that I've slayed a numerous number of people. And then they say, and David, his tens of thousands. Well, if thousands can't be counted, what's tens of thousands? Little wonder Saul tried to kill David after that. The 144,000, I would suggest, is not a literal number. It's a number that the Jews read and picture as the completion of Israel, or the completeness of Israel. Now that's what John heard. What he saw is in verse 9, a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, every tribe, every people, every language. The picture of the 144,000 is a picture of all of God's people as the Jews understood. They were focused on the 12 tribes coming together. That was all of God's people. But the reality is much bigger than that. The reality is the promise that was given to Abraham. His promise wasn't that he would be a father of one nation. His promise is that he would be a father of many nations. And so what John sees is the fulfillment of this promise of many nations coming together around the throne. It's the gospel having spread to the ends of the world. It's the picture of Matthew 24:14, where it says, and this gospel will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. If there is something, an activity that we want to take out of this, if we want to see Jesus come back sooner, it's to get involved in seeing the nations hear and experience the gospel of Jesus Christ. And then all of these saved ones, all of these sealed ones now stand before the throne, and all of them are singing together, salvation belongs to our God. Their cry is this: God is the only one who can save. And I've experienced it. And it's a declaration that puts them at odds with the world. And if we roll back to the first century, it definitely puts them at odds with the Romans. And of course, it inspires the four beasts to worship, and the elders to get off their thrones again and to fall and to lay down their crowns. And this picture continues of worship in heaven. All of this worship causes me to think about the great commandment. In Luke chapter 10, verse 27, Jesus said all the laws and all the prophets, they're summed up in this one sentence: love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, with all of your strength. I think this picture of heaven gives us a picture of what that looks like. all of our heart, all of it. It's much more than the first 20 minutes of church on a Sunday. Much, much more than that. It's about our service. If I can use this word, it's about our allegiance. Because we ought to worship with all that we have. It should occupy all of our thoughts, all of our heart, all of our desires, all of our strength. At least in comparison to any other pursuit, it should be consuming. At the very least, when we worship in church, in those 20 minutes, our thoughts should be towards God and not lunch. And thinking about strength, I was thinking about this as I wrote this message. When was the last time that I stood in worship so long that it started to hurt? Now, I know and I understand that for some people in our church, there's a reason you can't stand for that long, and that time frame is about 2 minutes. And that's okay. But for me, I can do much longer than that. Why is it after 10 minutes I start to think, oh, this is starting to hurt a bit, I should sit down? Like, I remember times where I stood for hours worshipping God, so much that I literally couldn't walk afterwards. And not that this is the be-all and end-all, but maybe that's a picture of all of my strength. Giving everything I have, but beyond singing, because singing is just a fraction of what worship is. It means our focus on God should be at least as much as our focus on our family, our focus on our work, our focus on our finances, our focus on our recreational pursuits. Yes, Daniel, even football. And some of you are probably thinking, well, that's really impractical. My family is really important. Yes, they are. But, and this will be controversial, they are not as important as Jesus. He demands total allegiance. If your allegiance to anything else is more than, greater than, you think about, you care about, you worship more than Him, Revelation says your priorities are out of order. Some people might say, well, I have to work. Yes, we do. And probably for most of us, other than sleeping, work takes the majority of our time. And that's fine. And some people would quote Colossians where it says, well, the Bible says that I should give my best to my human employers as though I'm working unto the Lord. Yes, you should. But if you're giving more to your employer as unto the Lord than your giving is unto the Lord, and I don't mean by time, I mean by focus, or you're giving to your employer as to the Lord so much that you forgot that you were doing it as to the Lord, then we have to question, where is our allegiance? Which brings us to the most infamous cast member of the book of Revelation, the beast or the Antichrist. And before you get excited, we're not going to speculate as to who that is. Sorry. But we're going to read about him in Revelation 13. Actually, there's two beasts that are spoken about in Revelation 2:13. One from the sea and one from the earth, but they work together in unison to outwork the devil's plans on the earth at the end of time. We're going to read Revelation 13. We're going to read verses 1 to 8. It says this: the dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads with 10 crowns on its horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear, and a mouth like that of as a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. People worshipped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshipped the beast and asked, "Who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it?" The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise its authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. It was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them, and it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all of those whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. So, we're not going to identify who this is, but we are going to make some points that I think are important for us to know and understand. Firstly, verse 2. The dragon gave the beast its power. We will read on that the beast uses political and religious and economic means to subdue its enemies. But the beast is motivated by the dragon and empowered by the dragon. And that dragon we read in chapter 12 is actually the devil himself. It's Satan. And we need to be reminded of this. And again, I think the last 18 months hopefully has reminded us of this. That neither Rome, nor any nation, nor any person, nor any government, nor any human, nor any system is the real enemy. Whenever we see death and destruction, whenever we see lying and stealing, we can be certain that Satan is at work, because that's his toolkit. His mission statement is John 10:10, to steal, to kill, and to destroy. And so we need to, as spiritual people, take the lens off the person who is the front and get them behind that, to the power that is behind that. So how do we fight? We don't fight through human means. We fight through prayer and through spiritual warfare. This is a spiritual battle. There's no point taking human tools to a spiritual fight. They don't work. We need to be reminded where this battle rages, and Revelation reminds us of that. Secondly, in the passage we see that this beast is given power. In verse 5, the beast was given a mouth. In verse 7, it was given power. In verse 7 again, it was given authority. We need to understand that this beast, though powerful, does not have overarching power. Whatever power it has been given to it and is under subject to the power of God. And so God ultimately is sovereign. Again, we've said this many times as we look at a situation like the last 18 months. We have to conclude that God has allowed this. God has given power to COVID-19. He's allowed it. As Christians, I think a question we should be asking is why? Why? Why did you allow this, God? What are you wanting for your world or for your church or for me personally? Rather than getting all sucked in and wrapped up with what's going on, which I know has been hard to do. But to ask the question, why? You know, it's interesting that it's written here that this beast's power is predetermined. 42 months. That's all it gets, 42 months. And the purpose of this is to encourage the saints, us, that the duration of our suffering is preordained. It's like, I find this amazing when God eventually punishes Israel for their unfaithfulness in the Old Testament. And Babylon comes and they take them away and they destroy the temple and they exile to Babylon. But God already prophesied even before they happened, this would only be for 70 years. After 70 years, you're going to go back and you're going to rebuild and you're going to restore and you're going to grow. God always has limits on what evil can do, especially what evil can do to his people. And Job gives us that story as well. And so this tells us that. Thirdly, there's a reference to a fatal wound that has been healed. Now, some people read this and they suggest that the beast will be killed and resurrect itself as a show of imitation of Jesus Christ. And that might be true. And there's many theories about this. I prefer this one. It works with my belief that Revelation should be interpreted recurrently and continues to repeat itself over and over again. I think it's just that the devil keeps making comebacks. He does it in our lives, and he does it in the world at large. I sort of imagine him a little bit like Wile E. Coyote, if you've ever seen The Roadrunner. Like, how many times should Wile E. Coyote died? Like, how do you fall off a cliff and have the Acme anvil fall on top of you, followed by, the rest of the cliff, and then you live to fight another day? To me, that's sort of like the enemy. Like, how many times can you be defeated and still come back? And we'll actually look at this next week in a bit more time. So I see this as like the enemy keeps suffering defeats, and eventually he will just suffer an ultimate defeat. But in the meantime, he doesn't give up. He's just like Wile E. Coyote. I wonder, why don't you give up chasing this roadrunner when you know you're always going to lose? It's preordained for you. But the devil is exactly like that, and I think that picture tells us that. It may mean other things as well, but as I said, I'm giving you my thought. And I reach that conclusion because of the 10 heads and its features. So the features of this beast resembled a leopard, feet like a bear, and a mouth like a lion. These are the same 3 animals that appear in Daniel's vision in Daniel chapter 7. A leopard, a bear, and a lion. And his 4th beast is described as terrifying and frightening and very powerful. Now, for reasons I'm not going to go into today because I already have enough to say, it's largely agreed that these animals in Daniel's vision represent the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, and the one that was to come, which was terrifying and powerful, the Roman Empire, which is now what the people of God are experiencing as Revelation is written. And so they're seeing in this beast the reiteration of the empires that Daniel had seen and had spoken about in his vision. And 10 heads, to me, suggests it doesn't stop with the Roman Empire. It continues to maybe, as we've seen in the past, the Holy Roman Empire. Or if we think about today, maybe the Chinese Empire, or the Russian Empire, or dare I say it, the Western Empire. For the original readers, the beast was doubtlessly the Roman Empire. In Revelation 17:19, at the final battle, God refers to evil as Babylon. As Babylon's like the starting point of this whole picture. And all the way through Revelation, evil is referred to as Babylon. In both systems, and this is why I think we can fast forward this to today, we see godlessness, we see lawlessness, we see pride, we see demand for worship, we see persecution of God's people. Something like 90% of all the martyrs in the world are Christians. That should tell us something. Systems that are characterized by human progress. Look at us and what we can do. And that offers its citizens security and well-being and enjoyment. Because every human kingdom eventually starts to believe in itself and eventually starts to worship itself and eventually becomes just like Babylon. But there's one final attribute of this beast, and this is why this didn't become 2 sermons but one. Why I included it in today when we spoke about the worship that God is due, is that the beast receives and demands worship. The beast receives and demands worship. In my opinion, I think we've seen this through our pandemic. We've seen, let's just say governments without putting a name to it, stand up and say, just trust us and we'll get you through this. That sounds very beast-like. Because what it's really saying is you don't need to trust anyone else, especially you don't need to trust God. He barely exists. We'll look after you. We've got your goodness at heart. We'll take care. Whereas Christians, we ought to be putting our faith in God. Yes, we respect our governments and we give them honour. But we never put our trust in our governments. We always put our trust only in Jesus Christ. We should be listening to him and trusting him. Remember when we said right at the start about the fig tree? And the fig tree comes, the leaves come regularly, and that's a sign that Jesus is coming back. This, I think, for Christians is the biggest lesson from this last 18 months. We got really laissez-faire about life, I believe. And if nothing else, this should have jolted us to remind us that we need to have an introspective look at our faith and our relationships with God. Didn't plan to say that, but I think for the global church, especially the global Western church, it's something we need to think about. The system says, if you put your faith in us, we'll look after you. We'll keep you fit and healthy, or maybe healthy at least. We'll keep you prosperous. We'll educate you. We'll employ you. We'll entertain you. We'll enlighten you. If you just let us consume you. Don't believe me? I will name a name this time. In the last 18 months, what ratio of thoughts have you had between, let's say, Jesus Christ and Daniel Andrews? You don't have to answer. Which is actually why I stopped listening. Because, I need to know some practicalities, like how we run church. But my spiritual response isn't changed by the next press conference. Because God has spoken to me that my role in this is to bring the hope of the gospel to a fearful world. And nothing that Daniel Andrews can say can change that perspective. Anyway, back to the text. Verse 8 says that all of the inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast. All of those whose names are not written in the Lamb's book of life. All those except the followers of the one true God. When you speak about worship, again, I want to use this word that I used before. It's a better word, I think. It's allegiance. Where is your allegiance? The beast, the system, demands exclusive allegiance. That's why Christians and Jews especially get persecuted throughout the world, because our allegiance can't be shifted from the one true God. But the system is trying to shift it and say, no, that religions thing, we don't mind you following religion that has many gods because you don't have any special allegiance to any one of them. But when you've just got one God and you want to follow him over us, no, we got a problem with that. Matthew 6:24 says this, because the beast demands exclusive allegiance, but then so does Jesus. He says, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. And I hope you're sitting down for this one. He finishes with this. This sort of comes from nowhere. You cannot serve God and money. No, but Pastor, we talk about money too much in church. You can't talk about money. You can't serve God and money. What is money? I submit to you, it's the god of a godless society. I submit to you that it's the gateway to the worldly system. Babylon says, if you give your allegiance to us, we'll give you lots of money. We'll give you lots of prosperity, lots of wealth. You'll have money to access all those things that society desires. Now, I'm not saying either that Christians should be poor, because I don't think that that's a good advertisement of who Jesus is either. That's why 1 Timothy 6:10 says the love of money is the root of all evil. You can have money, you just can't love money. The only problem is it's really difficult to do one without the other. Because money and the system of the world becomes all consuming. Which brings us to the famed mark of the beast, which is initiated by the second beast and initiated in allegiance to the first beast. Anyway, Revelation 13:15-17 says, the second beast was given power, there's that again, to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. It also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. What is the mark of the beast? You're always like, good, finally we get to the speculation. Just like, this is real preaching now. Strap yourselves in. I mentioned again at the beginning of our series 2 weeks ago that in Pentecostal churches at least, we've heard lots about the mark of the beast. Well, I have anyway. Not so much recently. Certainly back when I was young, and for those of you who've been involved in the church a long time, you would remember hearing lots of sermons about the mark of the beast. And in my experience, almost all of that teaching exclusively is that the mark of the beast is a microchip. I've never heard anything else. And I went looking through the Bible. I looked up my concordance. I typed in microchip. You know what? I didn't find it. It's like they didn't know about microchips in the first century. How dare they? As with everything else in Revelation, you have to take it back to the first century first before we can understand what it means for us today. Now, mind you, before I affect and offend all of you, it may be a microchip. I'm not saying that it's not categorically. I just want you to see broader today what this is really all about. If we look at the first century, we see a link between engaging in commerce in Roman society and worship. The mark of the beast has to have that link. And to engage in commerce, you had to worship Caesar and you had to worship Roman gods. Let me explain to you. For example, the Romans used coins. And on those coins was stamped an image of the Caesar. Now, before you start thinking that Queen Elizabeth is the Antichrist, let me explain to you. Because I don't think any of us are believing that. This was significant because although iconography had been used on coins, in the Roman day it was the first time a living person had ever been put on a coin. Before then, it was always ancestors and gods who had been worshipped. By Caesar putting himself on the coin, he was sort of saying, I'm like one of these gods. You should worship me. And not only that, you will be reminded of that every time you buy and sell and trade. You'll be reminded how important I am to this whole system and this whole process. And so it linked him. And it aimed to make the emperor seem godlike. And also because the Roman banking system actually operated out of their temples. The Jewish banking system did too. The Jews had coins, and you received them and you used them at the temple, and then you used those temple coins to go and to buy things. Otherwise, you just traded with each other. So, if you've got a fish and I've got a bird, we could trade that. But if we don't have any means of trade, or if I've got something you don't want, so you don't want my my cow, I can go sell the cow, get some coins, and give you the coins and get your bird. So that was sort of how that really dumbed down, but that was sort of how that worked. And so all of those revolved around the temple. For the Jews, that revolved around temple. For the Romans, that revolved around their temples. And so when the temple was destroyed in AD 70 and the Romans took away all of the artifacts of the temple, they doubtlessly took away also the stash or the reserves of coins that the Jews used, so they could no longer use their currency in their temple. If they wanted to participate in Roman society, they had to use Roman societies in their Roman coins in their temples of their gods, which for them was forsaking their one true God. Similarly, to be involved in the commerce in Rome, you had to be part of a trade guild. Now, sort of a bit like a chamber of commerce that we might have today, or a trade society, but these guilds were authorised by the Roman government. You couldn't have one unless the Roman government said you were allowed to, because they like to be involved in every part of society like that. And it was impossible to participate in these trade guilds unless you also participated in the feasts that they had to their Roman gods. Now, if you can understand or recollect some things of the Bible, we actually preached on this a few weeks ago. The Jews and the Christians had enough problem with eating foods that had been offered to idols. They saw that as an abomination. They saw that as sacrificing their allegiance to God. And so to participate in a feast to a Roman god in order to be part of a trade association, they also saw as an abomination. They saw that as denying their faith in God or in Jesus Christ, depending which camp they came from. And so they refused to be a part of it. By refusing to be a part of it, they couldn't participate in the Roman economic system. They could trade amongst each other. They could look after each other. They could say, I'll do fish, I'll do birds, I'll do cows, They could do that, but they couldn't participate in the Roman system of economic structure. That gives us an idea of what this mark of the beast might look like and how it might impact us. Can I say this? The mark of the beast signals allegiance and worship to a false god, and it requires forsaking your own faith. That's why I said categorically a few months ago, although elements of the COVID-19 vaccine look like the mark of the beast, in that particularly at the moment people are losing jobs because they're not getting it, we're not being asked to forsake our faith in Jesus to take it. So it can't be the mark of the beast, but there's some elements of it that look really familiar. Also, can I say this? It's not something that can be taken accidentally or mistakenly. You can't just wake up one day and it's like, that was the mark of the beast. I didn't know. I took it. That's not, you will know, because you'll be threatened with death if you don't take it. Before I conclude, and I'm getting close to a conclusion, you might be happy to know, I want to ask this question. This is a really, really controversial question. Is the mark of the beast a physical mark at all? Come with me. I'm not saying it's not either. It may be. I just want to ask this question because I think this asks other questions of us that are much more important. In Revelation chapter 7, verse 3, it says that the foreheads of the servants of God are sealed. Not physically, there's no mark, but they're sealed so that they're protected from what's to come. In Revelation 3, verse 12, God says this, or Jesus says this about the church of Philadelphia. He says, I will write on them my new name. Again, it's not a physical writing, but there's a seal, there's a writing, there's a mark on them. Neither of these are physical marks, but they're spiritual identifications. Remember, this is a spiritual book. But of more interest is where the mark is placed, on the right hand and on the forehead. And this relates to the Shema. The Shema is the Jewish confession of faith. It comes from Deuteronomy 6, chapter 6, verses 4 and 5. There's some other verses in that as well. It's the declaration that the Lord is God, the Lord is one. There is only one God, and it was a declaration that separated them from all of the other gods and all of the other faiths and all of the other nations. Because again, remember, they worshipped multiple gods. But the Jewish people and Christians, we worship one God. The Lord is God, the Lord is one. And they would pray this every morning, and they would pray this every evening to remind themselves. These passages declare the oneness and the uniqueness of their God. And in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 8, it says, tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your forehead. Now, again, this was a figurative requirement, because really what it was saying is, in everything that you see, you need to see through the lens that you worship the one and only true God. And in everything that you do with your hands, you need to do through the lens that you worship the one and only true God. But the Jews would often make this a physical thing. They would write out these verses, they'd put them in a little box, they'd put the box and they'd wrap it around their right hand, and or they'd wrap it around their forehead as a perpetual reminder of the God that they serve, that the Lord is God, the Lord is one. The mark of the beast is pictured as like an anti-Shema. It's like the opposite. Everything that Satan does is counterfeit of what God does. And so it may be a physical mark, but it's certainly a spiritual mark that says, yes, there's one God, but it's not Yahweh, it's the beast, or it's Satan. It's meant to take the place of God in our lives. And it similarly consumes all that we see and all that we do. The mark of the beast is meant to completely consume us, to be sucked into its system, and to live for its allegiance. This, for me, is why I'm preaching like this. This is the folly of just looking for a physical mark. Now, again, it might be. Please don't leave here and say, oh, I don't have to worry about a microchip. You might have to. But if you're only looking for a microchip or a tattoo or a certificate or an ID, you're missing the mark, pardon the pun. Because I think that many, if not most, if not all Christians would reject a physical mark that says, if we just put this on your hand here, then you'll be able to trade. I think most of us would say that's a bridge too far. Especially if we had to deny Christ to get it. But yet we believe that our actions or our non-actions is not what gets us into heaven. I don't get into heaven by what I do or what I don't do or what I take or what I don't take. If that was the case, Jesus didn't need to come. Jesus came because I stuff up and do the wrong thing and mess up all of the time. There's not a scanner at the pearly gates to see whether you had a microchip or not, and if you did, you don't get let in. God looks at the heart. And he looks at the heart and he sees if he sees Jesus there, controlling it, consuming it. And if he does, then he says, you can come in. If he doesn't, he says, sorry, I never knew you. So a better question for Christians, rather than would I take the mark or not, is this. At what point does the system of Babylon have your heart? Because if your heart is seduced by the world, if you're consumed by its sensuality, by its wealth, by its comfort, by its enjoyment, by its excitement, if money and travel and entertainment are more important to you than faith, then taking a mark is a mere formality. You've already given your allegiance over. Which is why reminders like COVID-19 are critical for us. We lost all the pleasures of Babylon. We did. They all got taken away from us. We lost travel. We lost eating at cafes. We lost driving more than 5 kilometres. We lost going to entertainment venues. We lost visiting loved ones, friends and families. And most of us have craved to have those things back. I'm not saying whether we should or we shouldn't. But my question is this: do we crave God with the same intensity that 2 weeks ago we craved to go to a cafe? Do we crave God with the same passion that we crave to see our grandchildren? Do we crave God with the same consuming thoughts as we do going to Queensland or going to Western Australia, which we'll never be able to do? Or if I can put the question this way, if we think of the things of the world, do we have them or do they have us? This is the real story of Revelation. If we go looking for a microchip or a mark or a beast and we spend all of our time speculating about that, we miss the point. The point is that God requires our wholehearted, absolute and unqualified allegiance. And that picture of heaven, every time we sing, holy, 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 and that's why we sang that this morning, it reminds us that only God is worthy of our heart and our lives and our thoughts and our deeds. And if he has our whole heart, then we don't need to focus on who the beast is or what his mark is, or because our faith will immunize us from that. And this is the story of Revelation. This is why speculation, church, is not good for us. Because it gets us off looking at the wrong things. We're focused on a chip and we ignore our heart, which is subtly and slowly like the frog in a boiling pot, being sucked into the system. Now, I'm not saying we should all stop going to cafes, cancel our Qantas frequent flyer cards, cut up our credit cards. We live in the world, but our number one allegiance has to be to Jesus. Remember, this is a spiritual book. Our number one allegiance has to be to Jesus. We're in a poignant moment. And I think God has really spoken through his word today. And for those of us here, let's just take a moment. God's already talking to people, I'm sure. The quietness tells me that the Holy Spirit is talking. And I know, because like I said, God talks to me as I write the sermons. Let's just take a moment in this room and online just to let God speak. If you're here today or you're watching on this live stream and you don't know Jesus, you've not made the decision to become a Christian, you've never given your life to him, I want to give you a moment to do that. This has been a pretty heavy sermon. Again, lots of information, lots to think about. But the one thing I hope you take away is that God alone is worthy of our lives. And you know what? One of the things that I've realized is that if you don't give your life to God, you will give it to someone else. I think that about our world. In our society, in Western society, we've pushed God out. But our governments have been very keen to fill the breach and say, that's okay, we'll now take control of your lives. You're never not giving your life to someone. And so the best person you can give it to is Jesus. Because he has a perfect plan for you. He loves you. He died for you. And he wants relationship with you. And so I'm not going to ask for responses today, but I'm just going to say a prayer. And if you're in this room or if you're online and you need to make that decision, follow Jesus, would you receive this prayer for yourself as I pray it? Dear Jesus, I thank you for your death on the cross and your resurrection for me. I know that you love me and have a plan for my life. Today I choose to stop living my own way. I ask for forgiveness for the times I've fallen short of your standards. And I invite you to be the leader of my life and to help me follow your ways. Come into my life right now. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. If you're in this room and that prayer was a heartfelt prayer for you, then please come and speak to one of our pastors, one of our leaders after church. If you're online, you can go to that website address that's down the bottom of that slide, www.central-church.com.au/Jesus. It will explain what it means to follow Jesus, and down the bottom there's a contact form that you can get in touch with us as well. We'd love to help you on your journey. Well, we got 1 week to go. I promise I don't have as much information next week as I did this week. And so I hope that you're really benefiting from this and getting a lot out of this. As I mentioned tonight, the perfect thing to do would be to worship. So maybe for those of you who've been here this morning, maybe what you can do is take some time this afternoon, put on a CD, spend some time in worship. You don't need us to be with you. In fact, it's good if you learn how to do it without us with you, because we're only with you on Sundays. But for those who have registered for tonight and are maybe watching this online, tonight we are going to spend some time and just have a worship service. And we're going to do that a bit more regularly. I won't say exactly how often, but maybe once a month or so we might do a special service. It's just worship and just prayer and just waiting on the Holy Spirit. We'll see, because the moment you make something permanent and religious, it gets boring. But we need to spend some time waiting on the Holy Spirit and loving Him. God bless you. We'll see you at either Alpha or prayer meeting or music practice or youth or church next week. Take care.